In the final months of World War II, American and Filipino forces launched one of the most dramatic reversals in military history. The Battle of Bataan in 1945 wasn't just a military victory, it was redemption 3 years in the making. This was the same ground where thousands of American and Filipino soldiers had been forced to surrender in 1940, enduring the infamous Bataan Death March. Now they were back, and they weren't leaving until the Japanese paid for what they did. But why did Bataan matter so much? Why did MacArthur commit so many resources to retaking this specific piece of ground? And how did American forces manage to defeat an enemy that had proven nearly impossible to dislodge from fortified positions throughout the Pacific War? By January 1945, American forces had returned to the Philippines. MacArthur had made good on his famous promise, "I shall return." But the Japanese still controlled strategic positions throughout Luzon, including Bataan Peninsula. As long as they held Bataan, they controlled the western approach to Manila Bay, one of the finest natural harbors in the Pacific. No ships could safely enter or leave, while Japanese artillery dominated the coastline. General Yamashita Tomoyuki commanded Japanese forces in the Philippines. This was the same general who had conquered Singapore in 1942, earning him the nickname the Tiger of Malaya. But his strategy left Bataan relatively lightly defended. Major General Nagayoshi Sano commanded approximately 6,000 Japanese naval infantry on Bataan Peninsula. These weren't army troops, but sailors trained for ground combat. They weren't Yamashita's best forces, but they were dug into some of the most defensible terrain in the Pacific. The Americans assigned the operation to Major General Charles Hall and the 11th Corps. He had 2 full divisions, the 38th Infantry Division and the 24th Infantry Division. Combined, these forces numbered over 30,000 combat troops, supported by artillery, armor, and complete air superiority. 6,000 Japanese defenders against 30,000 American attackers. But the Japanese had spent 3 years fortifying Bataan's mountains and jungles. On January 29, 1945, American forces launched their amphibious assault on the western coast of Bataan. The 38th Division landed near Mariveles, at the southern tip of the peninsula. Naval gunfire and airstrikes pounded Japanese positions for hours before the first landing craft hit the beaches. The Japanese response was lighter than expected. Sano had deployed most of his forces inland, in the mountains where American firepower would be less effective. His strategy was simple: let the Americans come to him, then make them fight for every ridge, every cave, every fortified position. The initial landings went smoothly, too smoothly. Within hours, they'd secured the beachhead and began pushing inland. But that's when the real battle began. The terrain of Bataan is punishing. Steep mountains covered in dense jungle, cut through by ravines and ridges that create natural defensive positions. Temperatures regularly exceeded 90 degrees, and the humidity was crushing. Japanese defenders occupied caves and bunkers carved into the mountainsides. These weren't simple foxholes. They were elaborate defensive networks with overlapping fields of fire, concealed entrances, and supply tunnels connecting multiple positions. American forces would clear one bunker only to take fire from 3 more they hadn't even seen. The 24th Division landed on the eastern coast and began pushing westward. Their mission was to link up with the 38th Division and trap any Japanese forces between them. But the mountains made coordination nearly impossible. By early February, American forces controlled the lowlands and coastal areas, but the Japanese still held the mountain strongholds. Mount Samat became the focal point of the battle. This mountain dominated the central part of the peninsula, and whoever controlled it would control Bataan. The assault on Mount Samat began on February 8th. American artillery pounded the mountain for 3 days, firing tens of thousands of shells into suspected Japanese positions. Fighter bombers dropped napalm and high explosives. The mountain disappeared under clouds of smoke and dust. But when American infantry began their assault, Japanese defenders emerged from their caves and bunkers, their weapons intact. Machine guns opened fire from positions American intelligence hadn't even identified. The first assault waves took heavy casualties and fell back to regroup. American commanders adapted their tactics. Instead of frontal assaults, they began using flamethrower teams to clear bunkers. Combat engineers used explosives to seal cave entrances. Infantry units would pin down Japanese positions with suppressing fire while other squads maneuvered to attack from the flanks. The Japanese fought with fanatical determination. Wounded soldiers would wait until American medics approached, then detonate grenades. Dead Japanese soldiers would suddenly spring to life and attack with knives or bayonets. Americans learned to treat every Japanese position as potentially active, even after it appeared to be cleared. Filipino guerrillas played a crucial role in the battle. They knew the terrain intimately, having operated in these mountains for 3 years. They guided American units through the jungle, identified Japanese positions, and provided intelligence on enemy movements. By mid-February, American forces had captured most of the key terrain features on Bataan. Japanese resistance was collapsing, but not breaking. Isolated groups of defenders continued fighting from caves and bunkers, even after their positions had been bypassed. The final assault on Mount Samat came on February 21st. After 2 weeks of grinding combat, American forces reached the summit. They found General Sano's abandoned command post, complete with maps, documents, and communications equipment. Sano had evacuated just hours before American troops arrived. The Battle of Bataan officially ended on February 21, 1945, though small pockets of Japanese resistance continued fighting for several more days. American forces had achieved their objective. Bataan Peninsula was liberated and Manila Bay was secure, but the cost was substantial. American casualties exceeded 8,000, killed, wounded, and missing. The 38th Division alone suffered over 4,000 casualties. The 24th Division lost nearly 3,000 men. Japanese casualties were even more severe. Of the 6,000 defenders, only about 1,000 survived to surrender. The rest died in combat, were sealed in caves by American explosives, or disappeared into the jungle where they eventually succumbed to wounds, disease, or starvation. The strategic impact of the Battle of Bataan was immediate and significant. With the peninsula secured, American forces could use Manila Bay as a major logistics base. Ships could now safely enter and unload supplies, troops, and equipment. This dramatically shortened supply lines and accelerated operations throughout Luzon. The psychological impact was equally important. American and Filipino forces had returned to the site of their humiliating defeat in 1942 and achieved total victory. The Bataan Death March had been avenged. Filipino civilians who'd lived under brutal Japanese occupation for 3 years were finally liberated. The tactics developed during the Battle of Bataan would be refined and applied throughout the remaining campaigns in the Pacific. The combination of overwhelming firepower, small unit tactics for cave warfare, and integration of local forces became standard procedure. For Filipino civilians, the liberation of Bataan marked a turning point in the war. Japanese occupation had been particularly brutal in this region. The return of American forces meant food, medicine, and protection from Japanese reprisals. 3 years earlier, American and Filipino forces had held Bataan for 4 months against overwhelming Japanese superiority. They'd fought a desperate delaying action with no hope of victory. When they finally surrendered, survivors faced the Bataan Death March, one of the worst atrocities of the Pacific War. Now the situation was completely reversed. American forces had overwhelming superiority in every category. Japanese defenders were isolated, undersupplied, and facing certain defeat. The battle for Bataan Peninsula in 1945 lasted 3 weeks. In that time, American forces demonstrated the evolution of amphibious warfare, mountain combat tactics, and combined arms operations that had been refined over 3 years of Pacific Island fighting. The liberation of Bataan opened Manila Bay to Allied shipping and accelerated the liberation of the entire Philippines. By securing this strategically vital piece of ground, American forces gained a major logistics hub that would support operations for the remainder of the war. And symbolically, they'd erased one of the early war's most painful defeats with a decisive victory. The same ground that had witnessed American defeat in 1942 became the site of American redemption in 1945.